Heyo, it's Kep. Are you ready for a yapathon? Because oh boy, I am too. This is going to be the video for my favorite secondaries in Warframe. I have gotten a ton and a ton of comments on my primary weapons video. Tons of people are asking me to expand on secondaries and melees, and I am absolutely happy to oblige. There are some really fun and interesting picks in here, and I'm going to warn you right now, some of these builds might seem really heavy forma heavy, and it's because some of them are, but I also use these weapons a lot, which means I've swapped slots and stuff like that. And before the Omniforma change or anything like that, I had to really make some mistakes, so I've spent way more forma than I should have. Before the video starts, I hope you have noticed already, but my mic sounds a little bit different. I got the Fifine K688. As far as I know, it's probably one of the best options for budget sort of podcast voiceover mics, so I really hope that my voice sounds a lot better. I'm really happy with it, and yeah. Special thank you to my Patreon members, because it was because of you guys who funded the whole mic thing. So your support is seriously appreciated. I can't understate that. I know I glaze my Patreon members every video, but like, you guys give me money willingly, and that's crazy to me. So I kind of need to thank you really hard. But I think that's enough yapping. I will go through my Patreon members really quick, but after that, we're gonna jump right into the video because I need to jingle the keys for you guys, or else I'm gonna the video's not gonna do well. All right. In the heirloom tomato tier, we have Wally West, Trash Goblin, The Law, Mr. Anonymous, Clausel, Astra, and NEC. In the beatsteak tomato tier, we have Rowan Mabot, Hoshidon Filth, Heather, Charger, Aonerd, Ak, and 10VY. And in the cherry tomato tier, we have Grug, Squeaky, and Darak. Once again, I seriously appreciate your support. This mic is very nice. You might have heard me in a different video mention that I think that my mic is breaking. Turns out it was the cord or the USB port. The mic itself is fine. Either way, in my eyes, I did get a really good deal on the Fifine K688, so definitely worth it. However, without further ado, the first weapon in this video is going to be the Coda Tysis. This thing has absolutely just gone under the radar. There have been a couple of videos I have seen on it, and not many have gotten very many views or anything like that. It's not had the widespread publication as some of the other Coda weapons. Oh my god, is this thing strong. This is probably one of a couple of the Coda weapons that is just capable of killing level cap enemies just by itself. This thing is really strong. You're going to see over here, I have a bit of a new layout for enemies. I have Drekar Manic Bombards, Exo Gokstad Officers, and some Drekar Butchers. The reason the Butchers are here is because we're going through so many weapons, I kind of need to get the stacks and stuff so you can see what it looks like all built up. So these guys are going to be our scapegoat, and they're going to take all those hits. But we have Exogokstad Officers and Drekar Manic Bombards. Something not a lot of people know, and I wish more YouTubers knew about this because it helps a lot with the testing. Drekar Manic Bombards are the tankiest unit that you can get in the Simulacrum that isn't a Juggernaut or a Demolist. Essentially meaning they're the tankiest normal enemy that you can get. The reason is because these Drekar Manic Bombards actually have the old health and armor scaling, I think. Don't quote me on this. They're tankier in some way, and I assume it's because they have the old armor and health scaling. That, there's a bunch of changes to those things in, subsequent updates after they were released. So I guess DE just forgot about them. But they're significantly harder to kill. I would say they have maybe double or triple the EHP of an Exo Gokstad officer, and you'll see very quickly when I kill the Exo Gokstads versus when I kill a Drekar Manic Bombards, you'll see very quickly these guys are significantly tankier. So if you see a weapon killing these units really easily, it is pretty safe to say it's a really good weapon, especially with some of these on the some of things on the list that are just going to one-shot these guys. So you'll definitely be able to understand the gravity of the situation because some of the picks are good. Anyways, I have yapped way too long. We are going to kill some enemies. It's going to be 3 shots, 1 shot, butcher, gone. Okay, so this is... Okay, so it took 3 shots to kill the Exo Gokstad officer. It's 2 shots, tons and tons of damage, tons and tons of multi-shot. The Drekar Manics, you can see, they take a little bit more convincing. However, the Coda Tysis is just so busted. This thing is going to ruin their health bar. The best part is I don't have any fire rate buffs on this specific build here, or I think I do have a fire rate buff. I think it's only lethal torrent. But if you get any fire rate buff, and I mean anything, it is really, really devastating. The DPS of this thing just goes up freaking out the wazoo. The reason why the Coda Tysis is so incredibly good at doing the single target damage thing is because it has innate corrosive. You're able to mod for viral and heat. The heat means that it's going to instantly strip half of your enemy armor. The corrosive stacks will whittle that armor down even further with the subsequent shots. The viral is going to make their health more vulnerable to damage. It's going to give it a multiplier. And the heat damage is going to deal a ton and a ton. Because we have so much heat damage, and this is the Coda Tysis, it was one of the first weeks that these weapons were released, there was a 60% heat Coda Tysis, and that's what this is right here. So we have a ton and a ton of heat damage, we have great self-priming on this weapon, as well as a bunch of damage and a good critical multiplier. The reason why this weapon shines so much, though, is none of those things, because the passive that it has. The Tysis will embed a dart into the target. As you can see over here, when we look at the heat procs of this enemy, these heat procs go up even after we shoot them. That's because there's a small DOT from the initial shot hitting the target. It will continue to proc its own status effects. It's insane. It's the stupidest thing ever, and that's why the heat damage just does so much, because it's constantly procking heat on itself. You're basically doing some weird kind of secondary melee afflictions type beat, because it's instantly adding those procs back onto the weapon when they're hitting. That's why Coda Tysis is so strong. In this build specifically, we're using secondary enervate to force these crits to happen, and just, oh my god, it's kind of insane the amount of damage that you can get out of this thing once you get it going. That's why fire rate is really nice, especially for the enervate build, because you can get that DPS much more consistently. Best part is, though, is you don't even need to crit with this thing for it to deal a ton of damage. These are all body shots, and you're just gonna absolutely melt them. Look. Just body shots. 3 body shots on an Exogoxite officer, and you can see the proc damage just continues to rise after you shoot. It's insane. It's so incredibly impressive, the amount of damage that the Coda Tysis can do. This is one of those weapons that will absolutely just shred through Steel Path and any level cap that you could possibly need. I actually have a few builds on this, so let me go over them. The first build is just Enervate. This is secondary Enervate. If you've looked around on YouTube, this is probably something like the builds that you've seen. Because we're using Enervate, we do want to have some kind of fire rate mod. I think Lethal Torrent is really nice, considering something like Anemic Agility is only 30% better, and you lose the damage. This is a good in-between of buffing our damage and getting a little bit of fire rate out of it, but it is preferable to have something like a Warframe buff, or an Arcane running, or you can use something like Reinforced Bond for your Sentinel. All of those will make this so much more comfortable and so much more effective, but even still, it is really nice. The base damage of our Coda Tysis is really high, surprisingly, at 3,796. That is before all of our Galvanized Diffusion is stacked up. So we have quite a bit of damage multipliers just baseline going into this, but overall, really strong. The reason we're using Galvanized Shot is not because this weapon is multi-guncio. It's actually additive, which is very interesting because it kind of has a projectile. It's just one of those really old weapons where they managed to fix it or something like that. However, because we are proccing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 different status effects, and we have 150% status chance, and all this multi-shot, and all this fire rate, we are going to be stacking a ton of status effects, which means we can increase this base damage by a lot and a lot and a lot. It is very impressive. So we have Hornet Strike here just to help with that base damage equation. Realistically, if you wanted to, you could actually swap this to something different. You know, if you wanted, you could go to something like Anemic Agility. Its priming with Galvanized Shot will be strong enough to do it. However, it helps with the initial proc damage to just have this sort of Hornet Strike baseline waiting for you, because if not, you know, it might take a little bit longer to get those procs going. I do have Prime Steady Hands here, and let me tell you, you absolutely don't need it. I maxed it out, as you can tell, just for the video, so I barely have any credits at all. I need to farm a ton, but it is really nice quality of life. Hiccup. Super nice quality of life to have the 85%, but it's really only a 25% difference, so I don't think it's super worth it. If you're strapped with on endo and you're strapped on credits, please, dear God, don't think that that this is required, you know, spend your endo and your credits maxing out Target Cracker or Prime Heated Charge or even Hornet Strike. Get your Galvanized mods maxed. How many of you have unranked or non-max galvanized mods? Okay, it is worth the endo. Please, please just rank them up because it kills me. And there's so many people I see, they'll join my server and they have like 1 pip away from getting it maxed out, and it's like, ugh, it hurts my soul. And because it's a Coda weapon, you're gonna put 5 more on it anyways, so you don't need to worry about the mod cost. Okay, plus max your weapons. It kills me. Anyways, that's a weird random tangent about that. But yeah, this is the build. We have viral over here, a ton of heat damage, plus our 60% valence bonus because it was one of the first weapons that dropped. So very nice amount of heat damage. As you can see, if we hover over the status, it is a 65% chance to proc heat, and a 38% chance to proc viral, and a 20% chance to proc corrosive. So at the very least, with all of our multi-shot built up, we're going to be procking a bunch of heat procs, and we're going to have everything else that we need as well. So it is really, really nice to have such a huge status chance. Unfortunately, the crit damage is still only 2x. I don't remember if the normal Tysis has a lower crit damage or a lower crit chance, but either or, it's 4.2 is completely serviceable. It is certainly enough to push this into level cap territory. This thing does not need to do more damage. It will just ruin any enemy that you can throw it at. So this is the Innervate build. The next build that we have over here is going to be pure damage. So we are amping up the damage as much as possible. This is something that you might want to use for a Warframe weapons platform like Lavos with Thermal Sunder, because as far as I know, that the guaranteed heat is going to be really strong, and it's going to apply to the embedded targets, I think. But the heat bonus from thermal transfer is, from what I know right now, it's multiplicative, which it used to be additive like modded damage, but they messed it up in one update, and I don't think that they changed it. Somebody can correct me, I don't want to quote this, but the pure damage build is very capable just by itself, and you will still see some very funny numbers coming out of it. If we really quickly spawn these guys over here, even though we're not critting, we're just dealing an exuberant amount of damage with the base fire, it is still really, really impressive. Yeah, you can just outright one-shot these guys. We come over to the Exogox stats here. They're still going to die. The Drekar Manic Bombards are still going to die. It just takes a couple of extra shots. So only really like super useful for the weapons buffer platforms. Obviously, if you give this thing like Roar or something like that, the pure damage build will pay off. For general use, please just use the Innervate build. However, we have a third optional build, and this is Forced Crit. This is a hybrid of the Enervate and the pure damage build. However, it has Cascadia Flare instead of Enervate, and we also have forgone one of these mods here. Hold on. No, these two builds are exactly the same. They're exactly the same. It's just the Arcane that is a little bit different. So the Arcane is going to give us a ton of damage. Specifically, this is useful for Warframes who are capable of forcing enemies to crit, like Temple or Harrow. Temple's 2, I believe, gives forced critical chance, so, and a really huge heat buff as well. This is a really good weapon with Temple if you wanted to go with a weapons platform build and you didn't want to use Lizzie. It is super duper nice. Now that we have stacked up a little bit of Harrow's 4th though, I can show you the real power of this weapon, because this thing gets a little bit insane, and when you start giving it Warframe buffs, it will just absolutely ruin your enemies. That's 2 shots just ticking away. You can stack this up in 3, and you'll see very, very quickly that, yeah, giving this thing to Harrow, oh my god, Harrow's just made for weapons like this. It wants so much base damage, it wants so much fire rate, and so much crit, and you just give it all of these things, and it will deal so much damage. It is really, really silly to see the kind of numbers that this thing will pump out, because oh my good lord. Yeah, even without the fire rate buff, this thing is going to two-shot the Exogox and it two-shot the Drekar Manic. You can see over here the damage that we're getting off of these procs are insane. And you know, the heat proc continues to climb by itself. So, yeah, oh man, this is such a beautiful weapon. I feel like I've spent a little bit too long on the Coda Tysis, but I really, really do love using this thing, which is why it earned a rename. I renamed it to Helmet's Sting, because that's cool and edgy, I guess. The next weapon that we have on the list over here is actually a Kitgun. This is something that was, you know, the meta back in the day, but you don't see it too much anymore. This is the Tombfinger Kitgun. The build I'm specifically using for it is Haymaker, Tombfinger, and Killstream. You can go with like Splat or anything, or for the loader, I think you can go with Splat if you really wanted to. I just wanted to prioritize a little bit extra of the status chance, just because it is multiplicative gun CO. So this is a weapon that's going to benefit heavily from having some sort of priming or anything like that. As you can see over here, the damage might not be super impressive, even though we just, oh god, oh no, even though we just one-shot these enemies over here, it can go much, much higher. As you can see over here, for a non-armor strip target, this is dealing like surprisingly good damage. However, it is really going to start to shine when we can prime enemies with it. So I'm going to put my Doriga companion on, and if we come over here, we're going to prime for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus 8 from the electric damage of Doriga itself. So there's going to be 8 different status effects that we can prime for that is going to feed into that multi-gun CO, and you're going to see really quickly that this thing is going to start building up some insane damage. Something important to note, as far as I know, is that the CO on these little packs of secret bolts, which I'll go into the arcanes in a second, they are also multi-gun COs, so you start to get some really silly damage numbers when you can stack those up. But we are outright one-shotting. That's 4.3 million on the pack secret bolt. We are outright one-shotting and two-shotting these units over here. That was another one-shot. That was a 2.6 million pack secret bolt. This is really, really strong when you give it the things that it needs. And just running around with a companion that can prime for you, or running a very specialized setup like how I was, this was actually the weapon of choice in a Disruption Yareli build, using Evade, and I would use Secondary Outburst with her Water Blades, and I would put Relentless Combination on my melee, and it was the Okina Incarnon with the first evolution tree, which meant that I was building combo incredibly fast, so I didn't need to worry about initial combo, and I could build up Secondary Outburst on basically any enemy that was near me. Very, very interesting build, and I, just building this and, realizing it has multi-gun CO and everything like that, I decided to take a little trip down memory lane, and oh boy, was I rewarded. This thing is surprisingly good when it comes to the single target damage, and if the ceiling is high enough, you can get these pack secret bolts to come off and just deal a punch of damage. 560k without any priming at all. It's kind of crazy. They will stagger enemies as well. If you have a blast build on this, it gets even sillier, because if you get lucky, that pack secret bolt is going to hit an enemy and deal like 5.4 million damage in a blast proc and just annihilate anything around those enemies. So I will show you an alternative blast build as well. But for the mods, we have Galvanized Diffusion, Galvanized Shot. Obviously, Galvanized Shot, because it's multi-gun CM, we want to feed, into that strength as much as possible. You can already see over here that our total base damage is huge at 4.2. We have Semi-Pistol Cannonade and Hornet Strike, because we have Secondary Deadhead as well. So we have a ton of base damage that we're feeding into the multiplicative gun CO equation, which means you get very silly numbers once you start priming enemies up. Prime Target Cracker is going to be over here just for a bunch of crit damage, and because we're using Semi-Pistol Cannonade, we don't need to worry about fire rate, so we can milk a little bit more critical chance out of our weapon with Creeping Bullseye. As you can see over here, I'm running a pure magnetic build with a Deep Freeze and Prime Convulsion, but you can very easily change this to a blast build by just doing this, and I'll show you how the blast build looks in just a second. Make sure to reset these enemies. I mainly just want to showcase what a blast secret bolt looks like, because it will just ruin the entire crowd. I think I want to get this guy. Hey, you shocked him. Thank you. Bonk, bonk, bonk. That's another one. Oh, that was a 2.6 million impact proc. The blast proc. Oh, there was one here. It's gonna hit an enemy and it's gonna kill them all. Ah, I can't get it to do it. That's so sad. Occasionally, the blast proc, if it does kill the enemy that it's being hit on, or, whoa, if it does kill the enemy that it's, being triggered on, it will just deal a ton of area damage. So it is very nice and very cool to, sort of, have that happen. It will just annihilate a crowd. Personally, I do think, unless you're... Oh, there we go. There we go! It did it! It did the thing. Apparently, it is a much lower chance than I initially thought. It was a 5.3 million pack secret bolt. Jesus. Yeah, very silly, very fun. I guess it is a little bit harder to get those, secret, procs to oh, that was 1.1 million here. It's very hard to get those to do the blast damage you need, but they will deal a ton of damage, and they do IPS as well, which is very silly. But yeah, I would just recommend the magnetic build specifically because Overguard can be hard to chew through if you have a slow firing weapon. The fire rate is 2.7, which is actually very workable in my opinion. It helps especially with these, sort of single target heavy damage weapons. So having a lower fire rate means you can get that follow-up shot quite a bit easier. Because this was primarily an evade build, I am using suppress, and I still do think it's actually a really good mod to have it just in general. You never know when you might come into some form of invisibility, and if you are using something like evade, it's going to help you a ton and a ton. Just get those shots lined up. As you can see over here, Pack Seeker, if you don't know what the description is, it just basically says that 4 projectiles will burst from the target and seek the head of nearby enemies. There's a lot of funny math that goes into that projectile, and let me tell you, it is definitely worth it to put that on. Secondary Deadhead is here just to help a little bit with recoil, but also give a huge headshot, not a huge, it's 30%, give a headshot multiplier to our Tombfinger. This is primarily going to be a single target build, so definitely something meant for disruption or void cascade, especially with that magnetic damage for the overguard. It's going to do some silly numbers. I really, really love the Tombfinger Kitgun, and I'm very glad that I picked it up again because, yeah, I'm just super impressed with, what it's been doing as of late. The next secondary on this list is going to be the Vasto Incarnon. I actually have a couple of different Incarnons on this list, but this one is very, very special because there's 2 very different builds that you can use when it comes to it. I actually need to equip a primary to activate Death Trap Trigger because this is primarily going to be a sort of a demolisher or not a demolisher, a demolist or a Thrax killer as per se. So we want to prime an enemy up and then pop that out. And even though it doesn't have multi-gun CO or anything like that, we are dealing a ton and a ton of base damage. The reason is because that Death Trap Trigger perk that we have is just going to ruin enemies. So you can deal a ton and a ton of damage, even with the primary fire as well. This thing is just sort of the king of raw damage. It doesn't proc a ton of status effects, at least not with this build, but it is really impressive once you get this thing's, weapon passive going, because that is just going to increase that base damage even more. You'll see very quickly once we get onto the mod screen that there is definitely some funny business going on with the base damage of the weapon, and you can just crank it up to a freaking million. For the evolution 2, it's just going to be Death Trap Trigger, as I said. Lone Gun sounds very enticing, and that is a really big base damage increase, but you need to forego the primary, which kind of sucks. However, there is a very interesting build that you can use with Lone Gun. You come over here, you can also use Extended Volley, and you can use something like a Reaper's Plenty. So you just have a ton and a ton of ammo. I guess realistically, if you wanted to use Reaper's Volley, you don't need Extended Volley, or Reaper's Plenty, because you have the 100% ammo efficiency. But if you wanted to, you could have like a pure fire rate build, and the base damage of your weapon is going to be super high, like 70 something increase, or I guess that's going to be a 64 damage increase to the total base damage of the weapon is definitely nothing to scoff at, and you can just have like a really interesting fire rate build. Definitely something to play around with. However, we have the build over here, and this has a pretty juicy Riven, dare I say. This is just giving us a ton of base damage and a ton of multi-shot. If you do not want to use this particular Riven here, you totally can swap this out for something like Galvanized Shot if you're going to be priming your target, or just a big heat damage mod. You want to increase the base damage of this weapon as much as possible. Merciless Gunfight is actually a really good option because it's going to give that punch through. It is a single target weapon, so having that punch through is going to help a bunch and a bunch. Overall, you don't need a crazy Vasto Riven. This one's not a god roll by any means, but it is still definitely powerful. It's helping the build quite a bit. So you certainly have options when it comes to what you want to replace in here. It can be basically anything. The Vasto Incarnon is going to perform very well regardless. The reason is we have about 50,000 base damage on our Incarnon form per projectile, and that is why this thing is able to churn out just the most insane raw damage you've ever seen, because yeah, we're dealing 50,000 damage per shot, multiplying it by 10 plus 2 different crit tiers. It's gonna get a little silly. It's gonna get a little silly, and that's even without secondary deadhead stacked up. So you have headshot multipliers and multi-shot and everything like that to take into account. It is really powerful. However, there is a very silly thing that you can do, which is an Overguard Shred build. This build specifically is trying to get as much base damage as we can on the weapon. However, we now have magnetic and a higher status chance. Because we have a galvanized mod, or I guess we don't actually need the galvanized mod for this, we can use something like this. Now we don't have any stacks on the weapon, but basically we have the multi-shot that we need to force proc that magnetic, and we have secondary fortifier. And we have all the crit chance and crit damage we get from Death Trap Trigger, basically meaning if there's an enemy with Overguard anywhere near you, you can immediately delete the Overguard from that enemy. And I think it is really, really funny, especially because, around level cap, a weapon might initially struggle with Overguard really, really hard. I'm just gonna search Heavy Gunner, Corrupted Heavy Gunner Xmas. You see already, the Overguard damage is insane. It's like, oh, this guy's Overguard? Bonk. It's gone. Bonk. Overguard gone. Bonk. Oh no, this enemy has Overguard? Oh my god, that's awful. Bonk, it's gone. It is really, really silly, and we do have some holster reload as well. So yeah, it's just, if you have, issues with Overguard, you can literally just, whip it out, just give them a little love tap on the body and it's immediately going to be deleted. It deals a ton of damage to Overguard. So I think it's a very silly build, and a very niche thing that you want to run it for, but it is certainly very funny. So the Overguard Shred is very, very silly when it comes to the Vasto Incarnon. Hiccup! The next contestant on this list is going to be the Kunai Incarnon. This is one of those weapons that has completely flown under the radar. This thing is so impressive and nobody's even talking about him. Genuinely, one of the very much so stronger weapons in this game. I don't even need a primer for this, but I will keep playing with Doriga because it is one of those weapons that's multi-gun CO. At least the Incarnon form is, I think maybe the base fire and the Incarnon form is. I'm not super sure. We do have a weapon down in the list that has a multi-gun CO on the Incarnon form, but not the base form. So very silly. For the evolutions, I'll go over the evolutions before I go over the gameplay test just to get them out of the way. We have Swift Conclusion over here, increases the base damage by 70, plus 200% damage to enemies below half health. This is going to help a lot in, super high level content where you're not going to be just one-shotting every enemy, so this helps a bunch and a bunch. Rapid Reinforcement is really nice for this specifically because the other ones don't feel like they're super duper useful. Having that 50% reload speed will help you get in and out of your Incarnon form much faster. You might assume that we want to use something like Death Trap Trigger. However, I feel like it doesn't fit entirely with how you want to use this weapon. You definitely are going to be going in and out of your Incarnon form quite a bit. It feels a little bit weird to have this as a kill weapon. However, if you do go fully into the Death Trap Trigger build, it is going to be really, really impressive. It does need a couple of hits to stack itself up, but once we get this weapon rolling, you're going to see it's going to get really, really strong. We have another Butcher over here, and then this guy, even with our non-Incarnon form, it's going to kill him quickly. However, it's when you can do this, things get a little bit silly. The Incarnon form has a lot of damage, and it has a lot of multi-shot. It's going to be dealing a ton of status chance and stuff like that, so even just sinking a couple of shots into a target is enough to just drop them instantly, especially if you prime them up. This is a really, really fun kill weapon, and another sort of single target damage weapon. You don't need to aim a ton at a time. You can just do this, and you'll end up killing enemies, but, where's the fun in that, right? This thing is just an absolute blast to just haul into a crowd and just hear all the headshot noise. Is it the strongest weapon that I've showcased thus far? Definitely not, but you can certainly buff it to do that. There is sort of this misconception that in level cap you need as much damage as humanly possible. The truth is that, most of the time we're dealing too much damage to these enemies. They're dying way too fast, so, just giving this thing 1 or 2 buffs is going to allow it to break into that stage. So even though it is not, your typical sort of, oh, shoot at this thing and, you know, something dies or whatever like that. It is really, really impressive. I love playing with this. I think the Kunai Incarnon is a very fun weapon as well. It definitely reminds me of the old days when I would play with a lot of throwing knives, play with the Despair or the Hiku Prime, you know, back when they were actual weapons. I hope Hiku Prime gets an Incarnon. I would love to see, you know, some kind of crazy, stupid fire rate, like fan thing or something like that, but the Kunai Incarnon is very, very fun. For the build, you can see over here we have Galvanized Diffusion, Galvanized Crosshairs, and Galvanized Shot because it's multi-gun. The reason we have Crosshairs over here is because it is mainly going to be a precision weapon, especially because the Incarnon form will home those projectiles in, so we're kind of always hoping for headshots on this weapon, so it just makes sense. If you really wanted to, you could use Prime Pistol Gambit, but I think it's a bit of a waste of a mod slot here because we can get much, much more with Galvanized Crosshair. Prime Target Crackers here is just for our, you know, critical damage. Even though it might not look like we have a ton and a ton, it is certainly fine for a weapon like this because of the crazy amount of multi-shot that we're going to get with our projectiles. We're building Viral and Heat on this weapon as well, which is going to increase that status chance because it is a ton of projectiles coming out of the Incarnon form. We're going to be able to proc a lot of that Heat and that Viral, so it's going to bump up our damage even more. Lethal Torrent is here at just very comfy amount of fire rate and some multi-shot. As for the Arcane, we're using Secondary Deadhead, because of this thing is all headshots. It just makes quite a bit of sense to run something like that. Definitely a fun weapon. Not the super strongest that we've had on the list thus far, but I really enjoy it, and it can go to level cap. It just needs a little bit of help. The next weapon in this list isn't really a weapon, but it's a primer. This is going to be the Rattleguts. I love, love, love the Rattleguts as a primer. This thing is so, so good at a couple of things, and I'll show you why. Its damage is not bad. it can kill with enough Warframe buffs. If you have something, you know, in your squad, like, I don't know, like a Banshee or, you know, something with Roar, this will be enough to just chunk down enemies very surprisingly. But the thing you might have noticed initially is A, the amount of status effects that we're proccing on our enemy, and B, the speed at which we are doing so, because this particular build for the Kitgun has Gibber, Rattleguts, and Ramflare, which are all designed for as much fire rate as possible, so it's a little bit silly. I will really quickly pull out the Void Crested Arquebex, or the ALAC, because this bad boy has multi-gun CO. I just want to demonstrate why it's important to have a primer. So we're going to prime these enemies up, and then bonk bonk, just like that. This guy will also probably get 1 or 2 shot. And this guy over here. So we have all of our stacks built up, and this is basically the damage comparison between not having any priming. Certainly takes a while, not even the entire magazine. However, if we come over to an enemy like this, yeah, that's why it's important to prime your targets, especially when you know the weapon has multi-gun CO. Priming is worth it on additive weapons as well, just a little bit less so. There are certainly a lot of options to get your additive weapons to deal a lot of damage without gun CO. But generally, you know, having a large source of priming like this and just it being so fast is really nice. Something you might have noticed though is that I'm not running Viral Heat like how you normally would on a primer, because you want that partial armor strip from the heat and also the damage vulnerability from Viral. Basically, I'm running a cold corrosive setup with Encumber because this is meant for a very specific Warframe, and that Warframe is Site 09. This is probably Site's best primer because when you're in a disruption mission, you are going to be shooting enemies through walls, especially your Demolists, and it can be a little bit hard to line that shot up, especially when they're trying to move around like this. Well, you can whip out your Rattleguts secondary and instantly prime them with all these cold procs. And now, you know, day good, you have a ton of cold procs on that target. They're not going to move at all. I can't remember if Demolists get slowed or completely stopped by cold procs, because I think that it's changed. I could be wrong about that though, but it is certainly very worthwhile to mod for such things. Oh gosh, that zoom. I accidentally changed my sensitivity on sniper scopes. But overall, really, really impressive damage. The reason we're running cold on this as well is because if you have an enemy that you need to stop, but you can't do it, this is kind of one of those weapons where you can hose an enemy down with cold procs from a really far range. It's really, really nice to just sort of see an enemy and be like, you stop, and then they're just frozen in their tracks all the way back there. So definitely very, very fun primer. For the build, I do have a Riven, but it's a really bad one. It's just Status Chance and Toxin. The minus puncture is like, it's still gonna proc puncture even though it has like a fucking nothing status for and status waiting for the puncture proc. It's fine. I'm just really here for the status effect, for the status chance, and maybe do some kind of heat inherit if I get secondary encumbered proc heat. It's just here. You don't super duper need it. The best role for a primer Rattleguts is just fire rate and multi-shot. You just want as much fire rate as fucking humanly possible because it's at 35 shots per second already, and that is very, very impressive. I have seen it with pure fire rate and nothing, no status chance or anything like that. I've seen it easily go to 60. So you can get a little bit silly when it comes to things. You don't need to mod for much else. If you really feel as though the recoil is a little too much, you can put your steady hands onto it, but you would have to form in that slot anyways. So, meh, I don't think you need to. Lethal Torn and Gunslinger is going to give us multi-shot and even more fire rate alongside anemic agility just to bump that fire rate even more. Amalgam Barrel Diffusion is great for primers because it's going to give you a mobility boost and it's going to give you that sweet, sweet multi-shot. So you're going to be ending up proccing more status effects. Jolt, Pistol Pestilence, and Frostbite are over here to make corrosive and cold, and that cold is just meant to sort of halt enemies. Pax Charge is really nice for a Kitgun like this because you can whip it out, mag dump the target, and then just put it away, and it'll be completely fine when you pull it back out. The next weapon on the list is going to be the Angstrum Incarnon. I'm really quickly going to hop off of site because he does have a couple of gun buffs over here. The Angstrum Incarnon, though, is a fun and silly weapon. This thing has, it is totally, completely balanced, and there is nothing weird going on with it whatsoever. Definitely a normal weapon. I am a liar. I am a filthy liar. This thing ruins enemies in its Incarnon form. I am running pure heat, by the way. I'm not running any kind of other priming. It is just dealing this much damage, especially to a target like that, is really impressive. Something important to note about the Angstrom Incarnon, who would have thought, like half the other weapons in this video, it has multi-gun CO. It is a little bit silly when you get this thing going. You kill an enemy or two here, and you're instantly going to be dealing a couple million of damage. That is just, yeah, 1.2 million over here, 1.2 million on the heat proc. And the best part is that it's not a super single target weapon, so we are able to have these projectiles bounce from one enemy to another, which basically means like you're getting a ton of value, especially with ad clear. If you just keep focusing down, the tanky target over here, you can really start to punish close, dense groups of enemies. It is really, really fun to just spray and pray with this thing, especially from all the way over here. If we just wanted to sort of shoot into the crowd, we're going to end up killing these enemies. These heat procs are really, really juiced up, and it is super duper strong. Best part is about the Angstrom Incarnon is that it is mega easy to charge its Incarnon form. So life is really, really easy to get back into this, and the Incarnon form lasts for a long time. So your upkeep for the Angstrom Incarnon is really, really nice. So definitely a very comfortable weapon, something that is going to handle a lot of the game for you. For the Evolution 2, we have Paladin Virtue. This is just giving us a little bit of extra base, critical damage. Oh, I feel like I have to hiccup. There we go. This is giving us some base critical damage if our energy is over 700. There's also this one over here that will give you base damage with overshields. I actually do recommend Heaven Foray for the most part. However, there are going to be more and more Warframes who can benefit less from stuff like this. So having Paladin Virtue is very nice because they're, I would say there's kind of an equal chance of having over 700 energy and having, a Warframe with overshield generation and stuff like that. So it is either or. It genuinely is your preference. In my case, I'm just using Paladin Virtue. It's not going to be active all the time. Rapid Reinforcement is great for that reload speed. This is going to get us in and out of that Incarnon form, and because we only have 3 shots for the main fire mode, having a bunch of fire rate is going to help quite a bit because it's going to, get us the Incarnon form quite a bit quicker. For the last evolution, we have Critical Parallel. The other option, oh my god, you can hear my voice is getting strained. I've talked so much. The other option is Survivor's Edge and Fatal Affliction. Both of these are really cool. The Angstrum Incarnon does have Multi-Guncio in its normal form and not in its base form. Very funnily enough, this does seem like a very good option. However, the base crit chance and crit damage upgrades from Critical Parallel, I can't fucking speak. It's gonna help us a lot. Big damage. I have a pretty decent ribbon on this. The minus status chance is very cringe, IMO. However, the base damage in the multi-shot is kind of insane. Definitely, if you don't have this, you can swap this out for Galvanized Crosshairs or, you know, some other 60-60 mod if you wanted some more status chance. Lethal Torrent is also going to help you quite a bit as well. So this is just a base damage ribbon over here. You will perform very similarly if you use any of these other mods because of the multi-shot and stuff like that. Galv Diffusion, Galv Shot, as per usual. Friggin' all these weapons have these mods. Galv Shot, especially the Multi-Guncio, is very nice. Primed Pistol Gambit and Primed Target Cracker are going to give us a ton of crit chance and crit damage on our thing. You know, our thingy thing, or Cinder Strike launcher, I guess. But yeah, Hornet Strike just for base damage, Primed Heater Charge to increase the heat damage on the Incarnon even more, and Pistol Elementalist because we want to buff up that heat proc as much as possible. Secondary Deadhead is going to be here as well, just specifically for shredding those heavy units. You know what I'm realizing? A lot of the weapons in this list are very single target weapons. Interesting. The last weapon on this list, however, though, is the Epitaph. Now, this is not your normal Epitaph build. You will hear a lot of people say that the Epitaph is the best primer in the game, and that's just is not right. Is not right. Compressa is the best single target primer in the game. You know, Epitaph is the best area primer in the game. However, there's very rarely when you will need to prime a large area of enemies, unless you're using Doriga. Hey, very rarely will you need to prime a large group of enemies. It's most likely going to be a tank busting situation. The only time it is useful to do that is if you're using Sevagoth, ironically, and you want to prime it for viral. But you'll see over here, kind of just out of the box, this thing is dealing a ton of damage. That wasn't even a headshot, did a million damage. This is a little bit of a silly weapon, which is why I saved it to, you know, the end of the video. This is by far one of the strongest weapons, or probably the strongest single target weapon in, you know, maybe in the game? It's kind of hard to tell. This thing is really silly. It has so much base damage, so much crit chance and crit damage on our charge farm. And yeah, you can just deal silly, ludicrous amounts of damage. There is not a single unit in this simulacrum that I can spawn that'll survive a primed shot from this weapon. And the best part is we're not even priming for viral right now, so this damage can go way higher. It is a really impressive thing. That was 115 million, 32 million, 118 million, 88, 23, 34. There is really not much to be said about the Epitaph in its charged form build, and yeah, it's a little strong. It is a little strong. So, for the build, we are using Pistol Acuity. Finally, we have a weapon that's going to benefit from Pistol Acuity. This is a crazy mod for the right weapon, and let me tell you, the Epitaph is one of those things. Now, we used to be able to multi-crit with Pistol Acuity. Not anymore, unfortunately. However, it is still very useful on a weapon like this because we are just doing fuck off amounts of crit and base damage to our enemies. Something also, hey, you know, a bit of a running theme, it's Multi-Guncio again. So that's partly why once you start hitting enemies with status effects, especially with, you know, Doriga running around and priming those enemies, this is really strong. Oh my god, the amount of damage that this thing pumps out is fucking stupid. Primary Deadhead, because obviously Magnetic Might is really useful because if we do get the occasional magnetic proc, it will help burst or break these overguard shields, but, you know, meh, we're just here for the crit damage. Prime Target Cracker and Prime Pistol Gambit just for more crit chance and more crit damage. Hornet Strike is going to help feed the galvanized, or the Multi-Guncio equation, as well as Secondary Deadhead. And we have Prime Heated Charge and Prime Convulsion here, not because we really need radiation on the weapon, but because they're both 165 mods, and this is going to give us the most amount of base damage as possible. You don't really need to armor strip your targets or viral prime them to do all the damage because the weapon just has that much damage by default, so it is pretty silly. The reason we're running pistol ammo mutation is because it doesn't have a magazine like standard weapons. It basically just picks up ammo, so there might very rarely be a time when you will run out of ammo when it comes to this thing, so pistol ammo mutation is going to make sure that doesn't happen. Overall, very, very nice. There is a primer build, and this one is not using secondary encumber, it's just using secondary fortifier. This is only really made for magnetic and viral, specifically for Savagoth, because both of those are really nice to prime for. Secondary fortifier is going to help keep you alive if your, AoE manages to hit another enemy. So if you wanted a primer build for the Epitaph, please don't use it just for priming enemies in general. It's really, really slow. If it's going to be single target damage, the Rattleguts or the Compressor is going to do best. But if you, for some reason, need a bunch of wide area priming, this is going to be your best Montloto. Overall, though, charged Epitaph is a little silly. So I am really, really happy to show you all of my silly little weapons. I do apologize that there's no AoE weapons in here. Obviously, you have weapons like the Kuva Nucor with, secondary enervate that are just going to rip through crowds and stuff like that. But if you need big screw you damage, this is absolutely what you want. But yeah, basically a bunch of single target weapons, except for, one or two of them. And I think that's about it. I'm sorry I wasn't able to show any in-game gameplay. The reason is because there's, a ton of different weapons on this list. There's like 7 of them. I really don't want to spend all that time because you can see over here, these are Dracarmanic Bombards. It doesn't matter what mission we go into. We're not going to find a unit as tanky as the one in here unless we're trying to climb our way to level cap. So yeah, it's gonna be fine in game, trust me. Anyways, I hope you have a lovely day, and I'm going to have a lovely time editing this video. And yeah, it's nice to do a little yapathon like this every once in a while, especially just be a little simulacrum warrior, hit those funny damage numbers and everything like that. Anyways, you guys have a lovely time, and goodbye.